All right, welcome to this webinar with Josephine from InstaBee. So today we'll be talking about how InstaBee has been building reliable operational data products with DBT and SYNQ and a lot of other tools, and some of the challenges that comes from being in the logistics industry where data is not always in the shape and form that it should be. So we're joined here today by Josephine, one of the analytics engineers at InstaBee. So thanks for joining, first of all, Josephine. Do you want to give a brief introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yes, hi, thank you for having me. I'm Josephine. I work in, as mentioned, in the BI team for InstaBee. I've been here for about a year and a half. Started out working with data about 5 years ago as an analyst in different analyst roles, and then moved more towards like data modeling and more of an engineering kind of profile where like working with DBT is my core tool that I use daily. And SYNQ is the monitoring tool that we use here. And it's been, that's
cool. And if you live in the Nordics, like we do, you might see the InstaBee products on the roads and in different places every day. For people who don't do that, could you just briefly explain what InstaBee does and what your business model is?
Yeah, so we are a logistics company working with last mile service. So if you ever order something online, you are able to pick that up in one of our boxes or lockers that we have in various locations. Or if you prefer it to be a home delivery, then you can also schedule that, and we will bring that parcel from the merchant or e-commerce store that you have and to your home. We also have the service for a few companies expanding on the secondhand market as well, whereas we have connected platforms that if you send something through one of these platforms as a private individual, or like, you can also use our services now. And that's limited to Sweden, but it's also a really interesting, exciting product given the secondhand market expansions lately.
Yeah, very cool. And we've, of course, been working with you folks for quite a while, and we know how important data is in this whole ecosystem. Could you talk a bit about why data matters at InstaBee and different ways you use data?
Yeah, so for us to be able to plan and measure our performance, data is core. So we have a lot of different services internally that we use to plan our operations, predict volumes, routes, how we should drive, like what's the capacity of our network of lockers. And also, of course, we want to measure the outcomes, how we perform our services. And we also have ways of showing this to our merchants or partners, the e-commerce stores, to show that we are delivering as expected. And it's also, of course, important for us to track our performance towards our consumers. So what do we promise to deliver, and how did we live up to the expectations of when your parcel was expected to arrive and when it actually did?
Yeah. And what would you say are the most important use cases? Are there certain things where data is used where if something goes wrong, it's extra critical, or people might not be able to do certain things?
I'd say that it's like quality-wise, it's always really important for us to make sure that we have it validated in terms of like it actually represents what's intended to. And if it does go wrong, it's going to be because we have this feedback loop, whereas it's we are predicting what we're expecting to receive. So if that's not provided, that of course the machine learning models won't be able to provide numbers, and we can't plan our operations properly, which of course is problematic. And then you also have the other aspects of whereas it also powers a lot of the revenue streams, whereas we need to identify how we're doing and what we've done, able to invoice correctly.
Yeah, and on the logistics side, is that stuff around route planning and distribution of the fleet and so on that depends on those machine learning models?
Yeah, I'd say it really does, especially on internally, whereas we provide data to the machine learning models, and they need to predict how to plan the route and how to allocate resources to terminal workers, for example, like how many parcels is this terminal supposed to receive, or what do we expect them to receive, and how many people do we need to have on that shift. So,
yeah. So it's a very operational use case in the sense that I assume this is needed at the very least on a daily basis, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, I'd say that's correct. Very operational use cases, and then we also have like the daily, that maybe not the same frequency, but of course quality-wise equally important is following up and be able to invoice, since we do that on a like parcel level really. So we need to be able to understand the operational events so we can invoice correctly and get revenue.
Yeah, that makes tons of sense. And if you want to talk a bit about the data stack you have at InstaBee, I know it came to be as well of a merger between Instabox and BotBee, but I'll just bring up this slide here though. You have your data stack.
Yeah, so what you see in the, like going from left to right, you know, the different sources, which are, some of them are databases, and we also have the icons for like the Google Sheets and inside. But we have MongoDB, for example, is a database that was used by Instabox, and then you had the Dolphin, I think is the MySQL icon, and that was the BotBee one. And so we have two different, like those are the like main sources for us that powers like different internal operational systems that we have built in house, or like each company did. And so we use a lot of different connections. Some of them are SaaS connections that use Fivetran. So we have mostly Fivetran connections, I'd say, and then we're still kind of developing more towards setting up custom ones, evaluating what should be the future of ingestion. We started with like Fivetran. It was selected at the beginning of the BI team years ago by Instabox to just get started really. It says it's quite easy. It doesn't require a lot of coding. It really is a good UI tool for it as well. So get started and ingesting the data, and then it lands in Snowflake, which is our main data warehouse solution, where we orchestrate the pipelines and manages like the transformations using dbt. dbt was also quite early on the Instabox side with dbt. It's about 4 years since Instabox started there. This was not existing from the BotBee side, so when the merger happened, it was all ingested, kind of lift and shift, just as is, to get it into dbt, so we could get visibility on what models there were from that system. And on top of this, we also monitoring the entire stack with Sync to identify anything in Snowflake, and also up all the way through to usage in Tableau. And then we have the AI and ML models that we expose, and then that is fed into the data science team, pick that up to train their models.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And are there specific, I remember we in the past spoke a lot around spreadsheets and how there's a lot of dependency across the board on spreadsheets. Are there specific places in this data stack and the flow of data where it's been challenging as a consequence of being a logistics company?
I'd say like mutating data from the source, so both from the sheets and from the actual databases, especially with MongoDB, which is a very large collection. Like this, it's built on this philosophy, like you have really large tables, formats and standards haven't really been set. So we've struggled with mutating source fields, like the technical aspects of the data types and the contents. And of course, Google Sheets is even easier to introduce breaking changes in by accident. Someone going in, updating something accidentally, writing in a duplicate without being aware of it, removing rows or changing the structure. Again, also not really aware of where it lands later and what happens to it. So I think most challenges comes often from communication, or like lack of communication, and not really being able to see where it ends up or how it's used when you're the producer.
Yeah, it's interesting with spreadsheets. I think we've seen many companies have a lot more reliance than they would like on spreadsheets, and I think it's partly, I think we call it the duct tape of the modern data stack. It's just something that's often the tool people already use, and it's very hard to avoid relying on it. I've seen different people do different things, including exporting data into seeds. You have a bit of version control in dbt, or using JSON and stuff like that to manage the spreadsheet. I don't know if you've found any clever ways of ensuring, at least partly, that the quality is okay.
We try to some seeds have been created instead of sheets, whereas like if I got one spreadsheet that I asked for as an export, and that I read that into DBT instead of sending it as setting it up as a sheet and a connector to it. So we would just have that copy instead in DBT or as a source. And then we have, but I think that's for like the non-technical users that are in the business that supports us with providing data on certain mappings that's very domain specific, that they are the ones that are owning. I think we've tried to just do testing really to validate like duplicates, so we can get a notification or some visibility on when that's introduced. We have a lot of sheets connected to fuel consumption, for example, that's filled in. And so we have one person that maintains that, and that's handled, I think, as part of the flow, and we can see like if anything breaks, that's actually fed back to the provider of the data to understand that, okay, something was wrong here, and we can have at least a conversation. It's easier for us to reach out and for us to help in identifying and highlighting that this, or how to solve it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic, this idea of bringing ownership back to the data producers or the operational teams. Maybe before we zoom in on data products and data quality and so on, could you just talk a minute about how you actually technically made that happen? So the idea of detecting issues coming from spreadsheets and then notifying that upstream operational team.
Yeah, so we have set it up using SYNQ data products that we're going to go deeper into later on. But we have the alerting, we do the testing in DBT, we try to group it and assign owners to our data models in DBT. Sometimes we stage data from the tech domains that they specifically need. So then we assign ownership within the meta of the data model. We try to identify and tag the team that has requested it. So if something breaks, we know who to reach out to. And also if we ever do revisit the model and we can't see lineage because they might use it outside of DBT, when they pull it out from their ML models, we won't see the lineage because that goes forth, but then we can at least understand that this is a different team using it, that we're the providers actually, and we as the providers should contact this team if we want to see any issues on it. And then that's also, again, that's owned by them, so any issues that would occur would also be fed back to them.
Yeah, we can dive into that a little bit. It's be interesting having a look at how you implemented that. Just before that, I know you spent quite a bit of time refactoring your DBT project as a bit of a foundational step for building these data products and building quality, and you had a big role in that. So could you talk a bit about where were you at with your DBT project before, and what was complicated, and what made you want to refactor it in the first place? I think that's something a lot of teams are thinking about, but when did you come to the realization that it was time to refactor the DBT project?
Initially, it was as I started here, I noticed that we had a lot of parallel transformation pipelines. When I joined, the merger had already happened. It had been the most urgent kind of emerging phase of the merger, where you had to migrate and keep things like onboard the all existing body database into like the environment that Instabox used in their DBT project. And as mentioned, I was just shift lift kind of, let's get it there without really having the time to evaluate what the contents were. So you had a lot of like that logic for both companies were kept separate, even though there might be similarities with the source data. For example, both companies handled parcels, both companies handled terminals, and you had some very lot of common denominators in both systems. Whereas, so as an initial thought, I would be like, kind of, let's also handle the tech debt. There was also, after 4 years of DBT, there was a lot of lineage that was very messy and nested. And so, yeah, suggestions for improvements. And then I was encouraged to let's start over, and very exciting task to take on. And so stepping back a bit and trying to see how can we make the unification and like actually build something that's more fit for this new world, whereas we are as one company. And of course, the data should be reflecting in that. And we also, there was a lot of work in like most of InstaBee as a company has focused a lot on unification, of course, after the merger, because what happens when you have two identical companies in many senses in terms of what you deliver? There was, of course, duplicates of everything in every service we have. So all the tech teams, there's a huge, very large initiative from the business and from all of company goal really to unify, to create efficiency and all those things, like the intention of the merger. So to put that into practice, and of course that should be reflected in the data. So overlapping with that, taking on these new KPIs and definitions and have that as part of the new platform. So I think that was very driving to why it made sense to start over as well, since you had two completely different, very complex with lot of legacy as well. That was just easier, and it was natural to start over and also evaluate all the data points we have and which ones are relevant now in this new world, which should not be.
And how did you start? So on day one, I remember we spoke more than a year ago, and you were sitting with that completely blank project. How did you decide on even the first model to migrate, and what did that first step look like?
I think just trying to step back from like the core building blocks. You start with like the first, just looking at the source tables and the underlying data that I had from these systems that we got, we do get. So finding common denominators in anything really. So it's been a lot of investigation, and I think each is taking step by step to identify what are the core kind of entities or objects that we are interested in. Parcel is, or like a package, whichever use you want, like those are very important, and of course very similar in the sense that that's regardless of where it comes from, if it was an Instabox or Budbee, they both were the same in the reality as in. And then you have these similarities that you kind of connect and align on as soon as you can. So that was the philosophy, starting up with models that were like not too specific to the original company as well, since you had a lot of Budbee focused on home and Instabox focused on the box and lockers. And they did both have a system supporting the other, so to say, product type, but just as a starting point, trying to keep it more focused on this, not like more neutral objects, so to say, such as package itself, what entity, like how can you describe that, and what to use it for.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what would you, I don't know if you did some analysis or maybe just an overall assessment, what was then the impact once you got there and you migrated?
I think it's a year later now, and we're in production. So what we got into is more of an easier to navigate. I'd say you have a cleaner lineage. It's also built on like a structure because before we didn't really have a clear structure of how we wanted to transform the data as well. So there were different philosophies in both the companies, and like that's reflected in the old DBT, legacy DBT we have, that we can't onboard easily because it's very nested and it's all very business use case focused models that then had another use case built upon them, and you get this so it's more easy to work with and onboard, since we have more neutral kind of components that we can combine, and they are predefined and they're also unified earlier on. So you can have, so the output is a data mart layer that's more flexible and ready for in the future when we get to more self-service. Is also more adapted for that, because you can have more clear defined entities or objects or events that you want to fit into your use case, rather than always having to build something upon a different use case. That was, sometimes you build something for one business use case, right? And then you want to reuse it, but it's not exactly the same. So you take it, but you take it anyway, because that's what exists. And that's why it gets a bit confusing, because that grows. And then that's where you have this challenge when you want to edit the first one to fit the other, but it only fits 2 out of the 5 downstream dependencies that you have. And that's really where the complexity, and one of the reasons why it was easier, and why this was chosen to let's start over and have this more not business use case specific logic too early, but rather put it downstream as late as you possibly can, and then we build the models specific for your use case based on these components.
Yeah, that makes sense. A much more clear structure in terms of the kind of source, the transformation, and the MART layer, and how data then flows. What would you, I think you answered some of these questions already, but what would you recommend someone who's just thinking about this, if they were to start out, or if you were to start out again, refactoring a project? Are there any specific things you would keep in mind, knowing what you know now?
I think it's really the importance of like learning to understand your source data and like the context that it's generated in, because it's easy to misunderstand like what and how is this field populated. And also avoid making assumptions, even though you think of it as, okay, what does created mean? As simple as that. At what point do we start counting creation? Like, how is the system generating this data point? Because for me, that might be how I envision this process. It might occur in one stage, but in reality, it might not. So I'm really trying to avoid making the assumption that you understand it based on those, like even to that level of detail, even though it might sound very simple, like, yeah, creation, yeah, it should be this, right? But then you really have to wonder and reflect and go to the source, go to the producers. That's also really go to the producers to understand the context in their system and how it works, because you are getting the output from that, and that's what you need to understand to transform it properly and put it in the new context of analytical purposes, where it should serve a different kind of question or answer a question.
Yeah,
and so
that makes a lot of sense. And I think we often see people who have a big need, like you do, to have reliable data, but they underinvest in these foundational architectural decisions, and it's just such an important place to start as well. So I think it's good to have that in place, like the way you thought about rebuilding that setup. But I want to spend the rest of the time here talking about you're thinking about data products and reliability, because it's something you put a lot of emphasis on different parts of your data stack. So I'll just bring up your screen here. Maybe if you could talk us through how you think about data products at InstaBee and what a data product is in the first place.
So data product here, using SYNQ platform, it's a grouping of different assets that we have. It's either a data model or a Tableau dashboard, using Tableau to provide reporting for our business organization. And so we've grouped them into categories, which is what you see here, and also based on, given the fact that we now have two databases, and the new DBT project has one database, since it's completely decoupled from the other, to really have this clean start. But that also means that we need to identify, when we see these products, where should we even start, which project does this live in. And so we have the dashboards focusing on, if you want to expand the first one, you can see the listed. It's mine, actually. Sorry, it's my screen. I'm the one that's sharing. I expand my. Sorry about that. So here it is. You can see that we have, these are in quotes, and that indicates for us that it is a dashboard. So it's not necessarily only a data itself, but this contains multiple models, sometimes that feeds into the same dashboard, but we've grouped them so we don't have to look at each of them individually. And so this also helps us really understand what are like our assets. Are they healthy? Is everything okay? It's really nice when it looks like this. And so it's simple as that. When we go start our days, we check this, and if it's all green, then we know all data has been built overnight and there are no issues on our pipelines. So instead of us having to go and check for all of them and trying to look at all our important key data models and dashboards, we can just have this one view. Before we used to do manual checks on each of them, and of course that's not really a task anyone wants. So this has really helped us to not just have a nice confirmation that everything went well and there are no unexpected silent issues that we didn't understand, because the lineage is quite messy in some places, and it's a lot of upstream models. So if we were to look at all of them and try to connect what could possibly feed into the final one, it's a lot of dependencies, and so having this one view is great. And we've structured them based on either dashboard or data model. So some of these data models are also just a representation of a DBT model or a group of DBT models that we want to keep an extra eye on, and that we are now a lot of users are interested in and inquiry.
Yeah, I like the way you think about this dashboard as well as a way of like looking at from the kind of consumer's lens. Every morning, are there any issues they should be aware of with data that matters to them? Instead of looking at many hundreds of data models, you get this view of what actually matters in the context of your business. So many people are still at the stage where they are thinking about what their data products even are in the first place. And I know you have a lot of data products defined and even groupings and so on. And you mentioned a bit about dashboards and data models, but how did you come up with the set of data products, and how did you think about also kind of categorizing them in priority?
So it's some of them are very team-based. For example, you see finance model, and that's tagged with like the blue marking here that this is the finance team. These are the models that the finance team relies most on and are interested in. And so this is a group of a lot of finance models that belong to this category. And so multiple data models here tracking AP and AR. And so that as a group, we know that if anything happens to any of these, we need to notify the finance team. And for the other ones, it's really the core reporting that we provide for the more operational business and some that follow the performance of our daily work. The daily, it even says in the name that it's important on that level of granularity. They check it every day, really. So if something is broken in it, it's important for us to get ahead of that. Often we can resolve issues before they start their day, not always for the terminal, since they start really early in the mornings. But for the business stakeholders, usually when we can look at these, we have had cases where we can actually solve the issue before anyone actually notices it. And it's if we can't resolve it, it also makes it easier for us to communicate this to everyone that in the business, that these are the impacted reports. Please keep in mind that these are not fully up to date, perhaps, or incomplete, and we are working to investigate. Because mentioning a data model for the end consumer won't be, well, I think it just raises more question for them than it answers anything. So they, of course, just want to know, is the dashboard that I care about up to date? Is it reliable for my usage?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a data product in mind, you could click on just to show that view of how it's composed under the hood with the lineage and so on.
Yes, let's can do the. We talked about fuel before.
Yeah, that was interesting to click at.
So here is actually, this is one of the sheets models we have, whereas we have all these sheets are grouped here, and you can see all the tests. And so this data product contains the models that handles these sheets, and really goes all the way back to the actual sheet itself. So if anything happens to it, we can go to this lineage here. This is only the one. Maybe I'm not navigating this correctly at this point. And so this is the group, and I think I can click on this. Yeah, there we go. A lot more. Here you can see all the underlying things that goes into this product. And you can see that all of these have different sheets underlying it. And then you have the DBT model, and then we union them, and we get to this final model where we can see all the fuel. So for us to have this and like just keep track of all these inputs that we get in one place, instead of having to go through each and every one of them and see how they're doing, it is of course really, really helpful. And it's also easier for us to communicate if anything is wrong with it and reach out to like, this is the sheet that's broken, or you need to have, we have accidentally have duplicate in.
Yeah, how do you, I think you even mentioned you have some rules set up where the owner gets notified. I don't know if you could show how that's done here using metadata, and how you actually at least partly automate that upstream ownership notification.
Yes, so if we go back to this, we have the, where did it go? Oh, yes, here. You see here is fuel operations. So fuel operations is fed into its own kind of, you can see we have the notifications here, and we have an owner, and this owner is configured to notify in a separate Slack channel, and it also gets the person responsible for filling up these sheets also tagged into that channel and a part of it. So in Slack gets a notification that this is the asset that has an issue, or in this case the Google Sheet that contains the duplicate. So it's automatically handled in that way by tagging it and assigning this owner to the product itself.
Yeah, I think it's really cool what you've done, because you both have this idea of, you mentioned some finance models, we have to notify finance people, but you also have this spreadsheet, or this set of spreadsheets which are actually upstream from your data warehouse and your DBT project, and then by automatically notifying these people, at least you start sharing that sense of responsibility of that input data, which you don't ultimately own in the data team anyway.
Yeah, we have it's funny you mentioned, like, it's with the finance team, we also have a finance tech team here. They have their own product as well. It's a data set that we have always kind of been the messenger for. So they produce it, and then we ingest it without any transformation itself. We just carry it through, and then it's connected by the stakeholders. But ultimately, it's the finance tech team that generates it. And so we've tagged them here as well. And they also have a similar setup as mentioned with Fuel, whereas they get notified, it's sent to their own channel. They also have been onboarded to this platform, so they're now aware of like what tests are being made. We need to make sure that there is a custom test to this as well, this data set, to make sure that we have new fresh data every day. And sometimes when the job on their side fails or needs to be restarted, that means it won't populate. And so we are able to test if it has been populated. And by running this test in the mornings to see, is this up to date today? And if it's not, they get notified, and they know that they need to go check their jobs that they have running. And either it's still ongoing and close to finishing, or it has failed during the night and they need to restart it. And that process is now handled by them, and they've been given access to as well communicate about the status of this data set, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, now I assume they're not data people by background, the finance team, right?
No, they're the ones that build the invoicing and finance software, really. So they're software engineers. They're not data. Data is not their main focus, and this is really, I think, for a lot of the time they haven't really been aware of how. Again, it's about communication. I think that's what's so great with this, that this enables us to get more clear ways of communicating across the teams and what we're ingesting, and for them to also get visibility on what they're generating and how to maintain that. And now we've been able to push the maintenance of this source back to them, and also the communication about this source and the status of it is also been handed over. So they are now in charge of updating all our stakeholders, which before was our task, and then we would be as the messenger going between them and asking them how is it going, and then we would update our stakeholders, and then we'd go back and ask again. And now that's no longer needed, since they own this process and they are able to just communicate to the stakeholders, we have restarted this job, data is delayed and incomplete. But it comes back to the producer having ownership of it, which it's been very good.
Yeah, that's a big win. I think that's something we hear a lot of data teams striving towards as well. I want to move on and as the last part of this, talk about what you do when things go wrong within the data team. But maybe if you can click the health tab really quick, because you have a lot of different types of monitoring and tests and so on behind all these data products. If you just can, maybe for 30 seconds, explain like what's the philosophy here, and what kind of things are you testing to actually be rest assured that when you see that green data product dashboard, that is indicating that there are no issues.
Yeah, so we have a lot of tests. We have the DBT test, and we have the monitoring groups. And now we've been going back and forth, and we're right now trying to evaluate like how to do this in a most optimal way. We monitored for volume, but seeing as like we've expanded with the products, we feel like it's actually gotten to a point where we're monitoring mainly like more dedicated resources and having a good overview of the product page. But here we have everything is green, so we're happy. We have some custom tests, and that's one of the ones we mentioned before with the finance tech model that needs to be validated in a different way to ensure that it's correct and up to date. As like just monitoring volume itself was not enough as it could be generated rows, but some of them will be null. So we have more specific ones going into the granularity, like specific fields that needed to be populated.
Yeah, very cool. And then when things go wrong, this is of course fully green now, and it's all good and happy days. But when things go wrong, I know you've adopted the incident management functionality as well. Could you talk a bit about how you use incident management and how you think about that as a data team, given that it's all traditionally something that we see software engineering teams being more accustomed to?
So the incident function has been a very good way for us to manage how to handle it when things do go wrong, and we can raise an incident, and it works as the communication within our own internal team as we do the investigation and we communicate the status of the issue. We also keep track of what went wrong, and so I can see if I can find one where you can see we also see our past incidents here. So and we have here a test that failed due to a new field type was updated. We had an accepted values test here, and that was added to the source, a new one. And so we updated the DBT model and YAML description to allow for this new delivery type that we received. And you can see here we monitor the Git pull request as well, so you can follow up exactly what code chases were made due to this incident. And we also added as a comment in the writing to be more reader friendly and to manage it within the tool even. And we can set the status here that it's fixed. And in this case, we also realized that maybe it was a bit too strict. So adding new values would be more of a warm configuration instead of just failing the entire model, preventing it from building. So this is one example. And
yes,
we also have, sorry.
I was going to say, this is one of the ways I like that you use this, where you actually have a log of what went wrong of all types of issues, so that when something goes wrong again, you can maybe correlate it to previous incidents, and even people without context can come in and more quickly get an idea around what went wrong last time a similar issue happened.
Yes, exactly. And that's been very appreciated for us as well. And especially as over time, when you work on your data stack, you get more comfortable and you recognize that certain issues may reappear. But before, we had to kind of rely on either documenting it separately in some Google Docs that would eventually perhaps be forgotten, because once something does happen, it's very easy to just focus on solving it, and maybe following up isn't as structured, and you don't have a clear process of how and where to document the solution. But here we can have it all in the tool. So if something does go wrong, it's very easy for us to go past and look at the past incidents here and see all the previous solutions that we've had. And it's really good for onboarding new people as well, as they also get to see the history of and familiarize themselves. So like, okay, I'm new to this team, what's common issues I may have to solve? And so at least knowing that there is this knowledge base, or like knowledge.
Yeah, I actually, this is something you will try on your own, but at some point I did an analysis. We also use SYNQ incidents internally at SYNQ, and I took all this data, including the headlines and the topic, and I threw it into ChatGPT, and I just asked it a few questions like, what are our most common issues, when do they appear? And actually you get quite good insights from an LLM when you start to have this long list of dozens or even hundreds of different incidents. So it's something, I think there's a lot there that can be done that's like really interesting.
Definitely. I think the ability to use this as a just historical learning platform for ourselves, and also I think long term it would be very good as well to just get an insights on like what models are failing the most. Of course, that's one point. You could have this as a good starting point to start refactoring or reviewing, and then how to improve your overall health of your data and code.
Yeah. Super cool and very interesting, Josephine. Thank you so much for taking us through all the way from how data is used to how you thought about kind of re-architecturing your data stack, to using data products inside and outside the data team, and then all the way to closing the loop with incidents and learnings. I think it's at least something we recommend many other teams, but what we've seen you do this idea of using data products as a way of looking at the health of your data from the lens of a business end user and also using this ownership functionality to start spreading out ownership. So I think it's really interesting. And if people want to learn more about you, is there any specific place they can go?
Yes, I have a LinkedIn. That's about it.
Perfect. We can we link to that when we share this so people can find it. Very cool. Thank you so much, Josephine, for joining. This was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me again. Take care.